James Croft stared out his apartment window, the reflection of street lights glinting off his eyes like the last spark of humanity dimming in a dark cavern. His fingers twitched on the windowsill as he whispered to himself, "I'm their keeper. I will keep them safe." The world outside his sanctuary was loud, chaotic, teeming with sin and corruption. He had never understood it, but James had found his purpose. His true calling was a mission ordained by a force beyond this reality, one that spoke directly to him in the quiet hours of the night. His task was simple but profound: to preserve the purity of women, their untouched, divine essence before the world saw them. He was a protector, not a killer. James Croft was a man of vision. No one else could see what he saw. The first time he felt the pull was at a park. It was a Sunday afternoon, the sun setting behind trees as the orange hues cast a soft glow on the path. That's when he saw her, Anna. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, sitting by herself on a bench. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her face untouched by the harsh realities of the world. There was something in her eyes, innocence, maybe, a naivete that made her seem like she had never truly been touched by darkness. James felt his heart beat faster. He had to protect her. If the world got its claws into her, she'd lose that innocence, that purity. The mission had spoken to him. Anna was to be his first. Later that night, James prepared for his work with precision. His apartment was dimly lit, and his tools lay neatly on a table. He wasn't preparing for violence. No, he was preparing to give her a gift, a form of preservation, like the old taxidermists who believe they were honoring life by capturing it in an eternal, unchanging state. He wasn't harming them, he was saving them. Anna didn't scream when he found her. She didn't even know she was in danger. In his mind, she was simply entering a state of serenity. He made sure she was comfortable, tied to a chair, her head resting against the back. She would stay pure, preserved in time, untouched by the corruption of the world. His gloved hands moved like a surgeon's, ensuring her purity would remain unspoiled. When he was done, she lay there as if asleep, her face still serene. He whispered in her ear before leaving her body behind, "Now we'll be safe. Now we'll be pure forever." As the months passed, James became more attuned to the voices that guided him. He began to see purity everywhere, in bookstores, cafes, and even the subway. Each time the mission called him to act. Emily was next. She worked at a coffee shop, her youthful smile radiating warmth. It was a smile that would inevitably be stolen by the cruelties of life, but not if James could help it. He watched her for days, learning her routine, hearing the whispers of his mission telling him she was next. When he took Emily, it was different. His hands were gentler, more practiced. He understood better now that this wasn't about him. It was about them. He was their savior. James spoke to her in soothing tones while he prepared his tools. He told her how much he admired her, how she was special, and that she was going to be preserved in her purest state. Emily didn't struggle in his mind. She welcomed him, grateful even. In reality, Emily's eyes were wide with terror, her body rigid with fear, but James didn't see that. He saw gratitude, peace, serenity. Afterward, James looked at her with satisfaction. He had kept her safe, he had kept her pure, but James' delusion couldn't stay perfect forever. One day, As he wandered the streets searching for his next charge, he stumbled upon something that disturbed him. A television in a store window flashed images of the women he had saved. Except the headlines didn't describe them as saved. They were missing. The newscaster called them victims of a deranged serial killer. The words twisted James' gut. His breath quickened, and for a brief moment, the voices in his head went silent. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "They're safe. I made them safe." The images of Anna and Emily flickered across the screen, their pictures accompanied by desperate pleas from their families. James stared, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the dissonance between what he was seeing and what he knew to be true. "They don't understand," the voices told him again, louder now, more insistent. "They're lost in their corruption. You're the only one who can keep them pure." But for the first time, doubt had crept into his mind. Was he really preserving them, or was he destroying them? The doubt gnawed at James, and he became more frantic in his mission. His need to preserve became an obsession that consumed his every thought. He began moving faster, acting more erratically. He found new targets, but didn't plan as carefully. He needed to save them all, but time was running out. He found Alice in a library. Her soft-spoken nature and shy demeanor made her perfect. He followed her home, but this time his hands shook as he prepared. Something was wrong. The voices were louder, harsher, urging him on even as his mind started to fracture. Alice struggled more than the others. She pleaded with him, her cries loud in the small apartment. But James heard nothing but the voices. He was doing this for her, to keep her safe, to preserve her purity. His hands, once gentle, were now frantic, and as Alice's body went limp, James felt nothing but cold emptiness. Something had changed. The voices were still there, but the satisfaction he once felt was gone. All that remained was a hollow void. James fled from Alice's apartment, but the world felt different now, darker, more twisted. The streets seemed narrower, the lights dimmer. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. He began to see faces in the shadows, watching, waiting. Days passed in a blur, and James' grip on reality continued to slip. He no longer felt the clarity of his mission. Instead, he was haunted by the faces of the women he had saved, their eyes accusing him, their voices now screaming in his head. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. Finally, he returned to the park where he had first seen Anna. He sat on the same bench, clutching his head as the voices screamed inside his mind. He needed to make them stop. He needed to find peace. And then he saw her, a young woman, no older than Anna had been, walked by. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear. She wasn't innocent. She was terrified of him. James stood and approached her, his movements shaky and disjointed. "I can help you," he whispered, reaching out to her with trembling hands. But as he touched her, something in his mind snapped. Reality came rushing back with a violent clarity he had never felt before. He wasn't saving them, he was killing them. The weight of his actions crushed him, and James collapsed to the ground, clutching his head as the truth overwhelmed him. The women he thought he had saved were gone, lost forever, their lives snuffed out by his delusions. In his twisted mind, he had believed he was a savior, but in the cold light of reality, he was nothing but a killer, a monster who had destroyed the very purity he had sought to preserve. As the police arrived, alerted by the screams of the young woman, James didn't resist. He didn't fight, he simply stared ahead, his mind shattered, his purpose lost. He had failed them, he had failed them all. James Croft now sits in a padded cell, his eyes vacant, his mind lost to the madness that once drove him. The voices are silent now, replaced by a deafening void. He no longer sees himself as a savior, he knows what he is. But sometimes, late at night, in the quiet of his cell, he hears a faint whisper, a reminder of the twisted mission that once consumed him. And in those moments, a small smile creeps across his lips, for in the depths of his madness, part of him still believes he was right. They were pure, and he had kept them that way. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.